control. Breach in 5, 4, 3.
What's up, guys? I'm Uncle Freedom, coming to you on another glorious and well-deserved day off, and today we're going to dive into video number 3 on the Minutemen Rifle setup. So if that sounds fun and interesting to you, go ahead, like, subscribe. Maybe you're new to building on an AR, or you've had ARs in the past, and you kind of wonder where it really matters for you to sink your money into build an ultra-reliable system, what some of those parts and pieces do that maybe you've heard talked about that you're just unsure of what they are. This is going to be the video for you. If you're new to what we got going on here, this is video number 3 for the rifle, and this would be video number 5 for the Minutemen layout series. There's actually going to be a 4th video where we go over bolt-ons, basically, so things you would add to your rifle to increase its capabilities. It's going to be a good time. So I encourage you to go check out the rest of them, and if you want to support the channel, take a look down in the description box below. There will be a link that goes to my link tree where all of the affiliates of the channel exist. People like Dark Angel Medical, 100 Concepts, Dry Fire Mag. If you were going to do it anyway and you use those links, it helps the channel, and I appreciate it. If you're looking to get in touch with me, it's at UncleFreedom213 on Facebook or Instagram, or UncleFreedom213@outlook.com. So let's get into this. In the first video, we detailed kind of what the rifle was and the requirements that we were going to place on it. Video 2, we deep dove ammunition, considerations for the round itself, flexibility within the firearms platform and the caliber that we have chosen, and what we can do within that, looking at some common considerations for AR-centric rounds as well as AK and some AR-10 stuff. But in part 3, we're going to talk about what makes up the rifle and why some of that stuff is important and some things you might not have thought about. So starting off, so we talk about the rifle itself. We've all got the envisionment of a completed rifle, but I see this said a lot, and one of the pieces you cannot overlook is your lower. I know there's like 5 forges, bro. That's crap. I am here to tell you that, can you use an Anderson or an Arrow? Absolutely, if they're in spec, which is a pretty big if. I have seen arrows that were absolutely beautiful, that the triggers had lots of creep in them. And the second I took that trigger and installed it into a higher quality receiver with better quality control, all that creep was gone and I had a super crisp trigger. I've seen buffers that ride in and out the wrong way. I've seen bolt carrier groups that scratch things up. I've seen triggers that failed because of the stuff. I've seen pins walk out. It's very important that your lower receiver is in spec, and that's a place where you lose out when you buy a super inexpensive receiver. You know, I've seen mags that won't fit into the well, or some mags will work and the others won't. That comes down to the quality control and the checks. And when you spend more money on a lower receiver, odds are it had better QC. So one of my next ones for one of my next builds, this is a Geisley Super Duty lower. This is going to be a really fantastic rifle, but this is a high quality forged lower receiver that I'm going to use to build out this platform on. So one of the questions we have about lowers when we talk about it is Ambi, right? Ambi's all the rage. It's super hotness. I will tell you this as a guy that owns Ambi and has shot Ambi rifles, the only ambidextrous control on the lower receiver that I actually care about is the safety. Everything else I can take or leave, and something I will say I've noticed is with an ambidextrous magazine release, I more often than not will drop my magazine because of the way the rifle hits my gear. So it's cool, but if you're not really a lefty, you could probably save a whole lot of money. So next up, when we talk about our lower receiver, one of the parts, the pieces, and it's honestly one of the only places where you can genuinely spend money and buy some accuracy, and that is your trigger. So the trigger biomechanics drops a hammer on a firing pin that's floating inside of the bolt carrier group, detonating the primer, causing the powder to deflagrate, the bullet leaves the barrel, right? One of the places we jack this up as human beings is in the way we control the trigger and touch the trigger. So a quality trigger actually can break cleaner, giving you less opportunity to screw up your sight picture. But when we talk about triggers, there's two different kinds, and actually there's four total if we look at it. And one of the ones we hear about is cassette triggers or a built trigger. So a built trigger is something like this Geisley, right? Mil-spec styled, if you will. 2 pins, separate hammer and trigger bow assembly, and then the cassette is an all-in-one, think CMC. There is something you'll see a lot with single, like the cassette style triggers, and that is underpowered hammer springs, which can lead to light primer strikes and your round not going off. We can all agree that a hammer dropping and not firing a round, probably not something we want to happen, especially in a situation that we're talking about in this video. Another issue you'll see with a cassette trigger is if you pop a primer, which will happen if you shoot long enough, if they get down in that internal workings, that is unrepairable in the field. You can't just take it apart and get that primer out of there or the anvil out of there that's causing your trigger to not set. You can't do that. You actually have, there's really not a lot you can do without screws and everything else. That's why these kinds of triggers where we just pop the pins in and out, we can go back to what we're doing. And then the other thing we'll look at is 2-stage versus single stage. So a single stage trigger is like a mil-spec. That means when you put your finger on the trigger doesn't move at all. And when it breaks, you break the full amount of the trigger weight. A 2-stage trigger is just that. It's 2 separate stages. I am a 2-stage trigger fan. I like them. A 2-stage trigger works by your initial pull taking up what's known as the first stage, which is anywhere normal, but something like this, we're talking about a 2.5 pound take up. And then the second stage is where the trigger actually breaks, and that would be 2 pounds on this particular model. It allows me to stage the trigger much the way I would on a Glock, where I would stage that trigger to the wall and break my shot if I was trying to be hyper accurate. Same thing applies with an AR. So the next one, and this one kind of gets overlooked a lot, and that is your lower parts kit. All those cool little springs and stuff, like your takedown pin, your pivot pin, your mag release, your safety, your detents, and your springs. If you're new to building a rifle, I'm going to go ahead and let you in on a secret. When you launch one of your detents or detent springs, it goes into orbit at a place never to be seen again, and you will never find that thing. It behooves you to have extras. It behooves you not just to have extras when you're building it, but those are wear parts, and they will break. And if you start pulling things out or changing things around, odds are you might lose one of those pieces. So it behooves you to have some spare pins and springs and stuff like that. Where it really makes a difference, and you see it, is some of these companies, like Forward Controls Designs. I really like that company, and they've done some stuff like a reinforced buffer retainer pin, which is awesome. And they did something I've never really seen before, and that was increasing the weight on the magazine catch spring, which made it harder for you to inadvertently drop the mag. It was a very deliberate act. It's much more positive. I really actually like that, and that's a place where your lower parts kit can make a big difference. So outside of that, the next piece we're going to talk about is your receiver extension. So some know it as the buffer tube. That's where your stock goes. Your receiver extension and your buffer, it is a place where you can tune things. If you have a hyper overgassed rifle or you put a suppressor on your new build, odds are you are now putting more gas back into the system, and that is going to cause a lot of undue and accelerated wear to your bolt carrier group and internals. But a heavier buffer will actually slow down that bolt carrier group and actually tame out the recoil a little bit and not beat the gun to death. I will say, though, instead of playing the buffer game, I am a big fan, and what will go on this guy is the BCM Mark II recoil mitigation system. It's basically the same thing as the Veltor A5. So what we're looking at is a slightly longer 7-position buffer tube with a rifle length spring instead of a carbine length spring in a slightly different, heavier buffer design. It is probably one of the most effective ways to slow down and change the recoil impulse, as well as to cause less wear and tear to your system itself. Highly recommend if you haven't checked them out. They're both about the same price. You're going to pay about $200 to get into one of those. So the next one, and this one's kind of, some people don't make a big deal out of this, but I kind of do because it's for me. And that is your charging handle. That is the piece that allows you to rack the bolt or clear malfunctions or what have you. And the normal charging handle is a very small affair. It is not big. It is hard to get a hold of. If you have optics on there, it is very hard to get a grip onto that charging handle. I always run an ambidextrous charging handle. Now, there are a ton of companies that make them, and you can kind of make your own decision here, and some of it is personal preference if you decide to go this route. But I will tell you, in somebody that's played with a ton of them and actually used them a lot, there are 3 ambidextrous charging handles that I use that I trust. One is the BCM Mod 3x3. You could also do the slightly smaller version of the same charging handle. The Radian Raptor. I really enjoy those. I use those on my work gun. I use them on my LaRue gun. And then the other one for me is the Geisley supercharging handle, or Airborne. The Airborne is a slightly more streamlined affair if you don't want it hooking on stuff. Supercharging handle is a little wider. They are all ambidextrous and very easy to manipulate the firearm. Things that aid in your manipulation and clearing malfunctions are something you should really pay attention to, because if you can't run the gun effectively, it's a stick. So now that we've gone through that, the next one, and this is one that people understand, it's the heart and soul of the rifle, but people don't understand just how important some of it is, and that is your bolt carrier group. That thing is containing a tiny explosion about 7 inches in front of your face at any given point, and it really needs to stay together. The problem you run into is mil-spec on that bolt carrier group is Carpenter 158. Another steel that you see commonly used is 9310. There are also some companies that make them out of S7. Something to keep in mind, if you're going to buy a 9310 bolt carrier group, buy one maybe from a company like Radian, because they are going to have a very appropriate and proper heat treat, eliminating the brittle nature of that bolt. You'll also see some other things on your bolt carrier groups, such as HPT and MPI. HP is high pressure proof round tested, which is a overcharged round, and they're making sure the bolt is durable. And then the MPI is a magnetic particle inspection, where they use a very fine, like powder material that's ferrous, and it will actually accrue and gather inside of cracks that are microscopic on a bolt carrier group, allowing them to be identified. Now, someplace you're going to run into this, and this is what happens when you go very cheap on a bolt carrier group. They may be batch tested, which would mean that roughly maybe 1 out of every 100 gets tested, maybe 3 out of every 100. But I will tell you that with Carpenter 158, the failure rate for bolts that are HP tested is like 3 in 100. So 3% of those bolts fail on average. And if you're getting something that is a QC of like 3 out of every 100, who said they didn't not catch the one that was going to blow and you do, and that's where your thing. So it pays you to get something that has been high pressure tested and magnetic particle inspected. Something else to keep in mind with your bolt carrier group when you go to do this is there are 3 really common finishes we see on bolt carrier, or actually really 4. You will see nitride, you will see phosphate, you will see chrome, and then you will see NIBX or NP3 or nickel boron. Now, the process that puts nickel boron onto a bolt carrier group, while it is slick and it looks really cool, it is not durable, and it causes the metal to become brittle over time and lets you shear off things like bolt lugs or break in the cam track. Versus chrome, which is a super hard metal, and it's actually really durable as it goes. Personally, for me, if I'm going to pick a bolt carrier group, I am a big fan of Microbest. If you're on a budget, they are very good. You can actually get them in hard chrome. Sons of Liberty Gunworks is also very good. Radian, as I showed you here, and then BCM, all fantastic bolt carrier groups. Highly proven, very durable. The next part of your heart and soul, and is going to be responsible for the vast majority of your accuracy, is your barrel. Now, I can sum barrels up pretty quick. There's a ton of different companies, but here's some basic things you need to think about. The heavier contour that your barrel has, which means the thicker the barrel is in front of the chamber, is going to tend to be more accurate because the barrel is not going to have as much whip or flex. It's also going to deal with heat of extended firing schedules better, leading you not heat stringing rounds. However, that is going to come at the expense of it is going to be far heavier than a like government profile or a weight relieved or a pencil barrel or something like that. But you do run the risk of dealing with that heat stringing issue with a pencil barrel that you wouldn't see with a heavier weight barrel. Kind of basic stuff is you have your standard chromoly steel that you would see, and then you see some other things like chrome lined. Chrome line is very durable. It is the military standard for lining a barrel. However, it reduces the barrel's overall accuracy, but it will be incredibly durable and last longer. If you want the most accurate barrel ever made, you're going to want a stainless steel barrel. But because stainless steel is softer, you're going to lose life on that barrel, but it is going to be the most accurate option you have. And then we move on to muzzle devices. Everybody's favorite things. You know, everybody knows the standard A2 bird cage, which is actually probably one of the most effective flash hiders that we've done, but we have to complicate this. You basically have three options. You have flash hider, you have compensator, and you have muzzle brake. Now, the recoil of the 223 or 556 is anemic, and if you can't handle that recoil, you have different problems, and the whole Minutemen lifestyle just might not be for you. But if you're going to do a brake or a comp, what I would tell you is we should all be striving for the greatness that is running suppressors, because we are American after all, and guns that don't blow out your eardrums are way cooler than guns that do. If you are going to run a can, by all means run that brake, because that will act as a sacrificial first blast baffle for your can, extending the life of your can, and it's not going to piss everybody off around you, and it's not going to make you deaf in your house. However, if you're not planning on running a can, I would be looking at running a flash hider. We've seen things with the new RC3 can from Surefire, where if you're running an open tine flash hider at the end, you actually don't reduce your visual signature at all with this new can on, because of the way it's designed. You have flow-through cans and standard baffle cans. Flow-through is going to give you less back pressure. Standard baffle is going to be more back pressure, but all in all things considered, the standard baffle can is going to be quieter. But if you're going to run brakes and comps, you need to be running a can on that. Otherwise, you're going to be deaf for no apparent reason. If you're not going to do a can, or cans aren't something you can do where you live, I feel bad for you, bro. I would be looking at a flash hider, because reducing the signature, the actual visible signature from your rifle system, is the most important context when we start talking about avoiding detection. So after we look at that, oh man, it's going to be your rail. Now, this is one I see people get kind of bent out of shape over, because there's a ton of rails on the market. You have just crap loads of company. And sometimes they're cool, and sometimes they're anodized something dumb like red. However, there's an important thing you have to think about with your rail, and not just your rail. What that is a free float rail is king, because a free float rail minimizes and eliminates your ability to inflect that muzzle direction with pressure you put on the gun, whether that's on a barricade, in your hand, torquing it, pressing it into a wall, whatever. That free float barrel is going to allow that barrel to have natural harmonics, allowing it to be as accurate as it can. However, the barrel nut is just as important. And if you have a really crappy, thin, cheap barrel nut on your firearm, and you put on an equally or even better than normal rail, that barrel nut is still going to allow POI shift and inflection on the thing. Not to mention, if you add things on there like a laser aiming module, now your zero is not any good. So buying a solid rail, anything that you're going to interface with and put pressure on, meaning like the buffer tube receiver extension, your stock, your pistol grip, or that rail, those need to be high quality, stable, and built well. This is going to be the one for my new build. This is the Mark IV from Geisley. See, I've got a full pick rail, and then I have pick rail on all four in the front, but then I have M-lock portions pretty much everywhere. This is going to be my new rail that I'm building, but you can see just how thick this is and the way it's built. And then I have the dual locking system with Geisley's barrel nut in here. Your barrel nut makes almost as much of a difference as your rail does, so keep that in mind. Don't buy a really nice rail and put it on a really crappy barrel nut. That's just a terrible way to go. Personally, for me, if you really want to look at rails, if you got some money, Daniel Defense, the Riz series, Geisley, these things are bomb-proof, and LaRue, but you're going to spend big money to get into those names, but you're getting what you pay for. If you're kind of on a budget, I will say that I have had very good luck with the Aero Precision M4E1 upper receiver and the M4E1 rail. I've had pretty good luck with both of those. If you're on a budget, that's something you can look at. But honestly, you can get these on sale, and they're not that much more expensive. So then we talk about your furniture, your stock, your pistol grip, your foregrip, whatever. We talk about things you're interfacing with. Now, there's some things you need to keep in mind. Your stock needs to provide you with a comfortable cheek weld so that you're consistent positioning behind the rifle so that you can be as accurate as possible. Your grip needs to be such that it's comfortable in your hand and it doesn't impede your ability to pull the trigger efficiently. If you have a pistol grip with a very steep rake to the back, you are actually going to have to pull the trigger this way to get it lined up, whereas if it's a more vertical grip, it comes straight back into your hand. That's why vertical vertical pistol grips have become so much, like, you see them everywhere. Something with not as much of an angle versus the original A2 style A1 pistol grip with the little nubbin on there that's really terrible and like swept back like a foul. Those make a big deal, but you need to remember something when we talk about furniture. It should be quality and it should enhance your ability to run the rifle. However, and it's all personal preference, right? Your brands, your materials. But I'm going to tell you something. Cheap is not a personal preference. Cheap is like a fortune cookie, man. Like, it's not a personal preference. You should be striving for greatness, not for cheapness. And then finally, always remember this, because this is something I don't hear touched on. Always remember the repairability. How can you fix your system if it goes down in the field? And how do you maintenance it? All those parts, your bolt carrier group, gas rings, pins and springs, a bolt rebuild kit with like a firing pin, an extra cam pin. Those things are easy to carry and they put your gun right back in the fight again. But where we run into an issue is if you buy stuff that's ultra proprietary, thank you, Knights, you can't just swap things out and make it work better. And you're sold into that system and it's expensive. So something to keep in mind. I know you're really excited about your short stroke gas piston upper, but if you don't have a spare bolt carrier group, you might not be doing so great if your bolt shatters. Something to keep in the back of your head. Things like gas rings and stuff like that, they are all consumable, and every part of your rifle has a life expectancy, and you need to understand that, and you need to plan accordingly. So guys, that was a look at rifle part 3, the kind of nuts and bolts in the big part. One more video to come on this. Part 4 is going to be your bolt-ons. We're talking lights, we're talking laser Ambi modules, we're talking optics, and how you need to view this. And it's probably some things you didn't know. So guys, I am Uncle Freedom. Take care of yourself, take care of each other. Till next time, I'll see you later.